when you are a terrorist in a tunnel, making decisions of should we put up our hands and surrender, or should we keep fighting? And then you see 5,000 protesting in Boston, 10,000 protesting for you in New York City, 20,000 in London and LA and San Francisco. And you see this and you're like, all I have to do is just keep going and the West will carry me. They actually gave oxygen to Hamas to keep fighting, and to Hezbollah and the Houthis, and now to the IRGC.
Since October 7th, few voices inside America's elite universities have become more recognized and more outspoken than Shai Davidai, a professor at Columbia University who became one of the loudest critics of anti-Semitism and intimidation and ideological extremism on college campuses. While many stayed silent, he publicly confronted university leadership, defended Jewish students, and warned that what's happening on campuses is about far more than Israel alone. Professor Shai Davidai, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Daniel, and thank you for doing this show, this podcast, this series. I want to say one thing, because you really rarely, people introduce me in different ways, and I think you really got to the point. Yes, I've become this face and voice about anti-Semitism, but really, for me, the fight is way, way deeper. So, I get a lot of tattoos. I'm a tat up man. And the first tattoo I got after October 7 was Hebrew, and it says emet, truth. Because for me, what I saw when I was on campus and everything erupted was just a distortion of truth, of objective truth, of moral truths. And as an academic, if we put the Jewish aside, if we put the Israeli aside, just as an academic, I felt that this is not what I signed up for. This is not what academia is supposed to be. And this is why I and others had to stand up and speak up.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, since October 7th, what do you think most Americans still fundamentally do not understand about what's happening on these elite campuses?
Amazing question. I think the one thing that Americans don't understand, and by the way, not just Americans, everywhere around the world, they think the students are the problem. Now, partially that is because the students are the vessel for much of the hatred that we see on campuses, much of the radicalism, shutting down conversations, excluding certain people from spaces, the kafiyas, like the students make for a sexy New York Times story. But the real problem is the professors. The students don't come to campus with these ready-made ideas about Israel and about Jews. Unfortunately, now we're starting to see high school students getting indoctrinated, but really most students, they come onto campus not even knowing where Israel is on the map, what Israel is, how many Jews are there in the world, right? Like basic facts. They show up on campus and they meet these energetic, charismatic, but malpracticing professors that just open up their minds and throw in a lot of trash and then close it up, wrap it with a kafia, and push them onto campus protests. So while we see explosions on campus or eruptions on campus being the students, and then we think now that there are no protests, everything is back to normal. Like, no, nothing is back to normal, because the professors, none of them have paid a price. None of them have been accountable for what they did and are still doing until the next time.
Yeah. Now, you've said that terrorism is not just violence, it's the act of terrorizing people into silence. Do you think that same psychology now exists on American campuses?
Definitely. I mean, look, when we talk about terrorism and it's become like this word that everyone deconstructs and breaks down and is this terrorism, is that terrorism? But when you really think about what the idea of terrorism is, and when you look at how terrorism is expressed in around the world, the idea is not to attack every person that I disagree with or every person that I think is a problem, but the idea is to, lack of a better word, to terrorize, to create an experience that if I randomly and frequently enough attack a few individuals, everyone else will take a lesson and stop doing what I want them to stop doing. Right. So, of course, if you take it to the most extreme, when a suicide bomber, Hamas suicide bomber boards a bus in Jerusalem and explodes themselves, what they're really doing is not just harming or killing the 20 something Jews and Israelis, non-Jewish Israelis there, but what they're creating is an experience where everyone now is afraid to take a bus. Everyone now is afraid to leave their home. That's the idea of terrorizing. Same thing if you go on to college campuses or really in any part of the media or the elitist establishment. You go after a few individuals harshly enough, frequently enough, and randomly enough so that everyone else just keeps their mouth shut. I think part of the problem of why my story, or problem, I don't know, why my story got so much prominence is because I refused to keep my mouth shut. So when the protesters used everything in their wheelhouse, including, filing false complaints at me, including starting rumors online, and I just like said, no, you're not going to shut me up. Then they went and they had an imam from Utica, New York, a radical extremist imam who said you need to target Shai Davidai, and if you silence him, you will silence 100 more professors like him. Again, I refuse to be silenced. Then the university, we have a problem of about hundreds of students, faculty, and staff promoting terrorism on campus. And we have another problem, which is one professor who's calling out that problem. What did the university do? They went after me, thinking if they silence me, then no more professors like me would do the same. Lo and behold, I refuse to keep my mouth shut, right? But what they do does create a self-censoring on campuses, creates fear, and a lot of people that I meet saying, I wish I could do what you do, but I'm afraid, I'm worried, or in other words, I've been terrorized.
What do you think is more dangerous, the extremists themselves or the institutions that are protecting them?
Look, there's always going to be extremists, and at the end of the day, the proximal danger comes from the extremists. Either if it's the extremists with a bomb, or extremists with a New York Times op-ed, right? The column. It doesn't matter. Like the extremists themselves are the ones doing the damage. But the extremists would never have the platform and the ability to do the damage if it's not for the institutions that are harboring them, sometimes willingly, sometimes unwillingly, and the institutions that actually give them the tools they need in order to engage in what they engage, right? So famously on Columbia's campus, still 3 years later, nothing happened, but we have a professor called Joseph Massad, who on October 8th wrote about the joy and jubilation that he experienced seeing the October 7 massacre, right? That's an extremist professor who is defiling American students' minds. Now, Joseph Massad would be an extremist if he were Columbia or if he were somewhere else. But Columbia gives him a classroom, gives him 50 to 100 students every year, new students, give him ability to credentials to go and publish his lies and libels, gives him the ability to hire other people like him, promote other people like them, and create a network of extremists. That's why I, from the very first moment, didn't go after the students, didn't go after the professors, went after the institutions. Now, we also have to remember that these institutions are funded by us, the taxpayers. This now we're May 18th, about a month after hopefully everyone paid their taxes, right? Your money is going to extremists. When you pay, and there's no such thing as a private university in the US, the Columbia University gets $3.5 billion every year from taxpayer money. So when you pay your taxes in New York State or in California or wherever it is, some of that money is going to Harvard and Columbia and Berkeley and wherever it is. And some of that money then goes to the extremists. Now, I don't want to fund extremists, but I can't go to Joseph Massad and tell him, stop being anti-Semite. But what I can't do is go to Columbia and say, stop hiring anti-Semites, stop promoting anti-Semites, so platforming anti-Semites. So that's why my main focus is there.
You said that the visible protests may have faded. We don't see as many as we did in the early days, but the ideology went underground. Is that actually more dangerous?
I'm a true believer in I'd rather see the enemy that I see rather than the enemy that I don't see. So while I am grateful that the protests have kind of died down, which means in concrete terms that openly Jewish, openly Israeli, and openly Zionist students can go to class and learn what they paid for, what they went for. So that's amazing. That's incredible. But despite those net positives in the short term, in the long term, what this means is that for younger siblings, 5, 10 years from now, when they'll go to college, they'll have a harder time doing what we're doing now, just because the professors are learning, the professors are adapting. They've learned that maybe protests are one way to go, but maybe a different way to push the Zionists, quote unquote Zionists out, basically the Jews that refuse to denounce their identity. They'll learn that there are different ways. In the same way that between every war between Israel and Hamas, there was years of quiet. Sometimes it was 2 years, sometimes it was 5 years, sometimes it was longer, right? But then every next war was worse because Hamas, the terrorists, they adapted their strategies to meet whatever new what they saw as challenges. These professors are now adapting their syllabi. They are adapting how they communicate about Israel, about Jews, and about America to convey their hatred but also to fly under the radar. And I worry about that.
One of your most powerful lines was, when you get punched in the face, you have two choices: shut up or speak up, right? So, why do you think so many people choose silence? And do you think that there are many professors that privately agree with you but are terrified to say it publicly?
Yeah. Have you ever been punched in the face?
No.
I've been punched in the face once by an undercover cop before October 7, unrelated to all of this, and it's a painful experience, but more than a painful experience, it's a humiliating experience because it tells you basically that there's a hierarchy, and in the pecking order, you keep your mouth shut. Now, as you probably already understand, I don't keep my mouth shut, right? But it is a scary thing. It's a dangerous thing. So it's something that might not feel comfortable. So I understand every person who wants to speak up and doesn't. Like I understand it. Many times I want to say something and I feel that fear of maybe I shouldn't speak up, right? I don't judge people for that fear. I judge people, or not judge, I evaluate people based on their succumbing to the fear, right? I can understand everything, the worries that people have, but then I just tell them this one thing that really motivates me is, you know, yes, you're fearful now for the repercussions of you speaking up or standing up or doing something. I am more fearful of the repercussions of you and 1,000 like you who are afraid to speak up because the other side hears that silence. And the administrations, what we talked about, supposedly the neutral administrations, they hear that silence and they act based on that silence. So while you think you're making your life easier by not speaking up, in the long run, you're making your life, and again, your life for your children, your grandchildren, way harder. I'll give you an example. I wear these shirts. So today I'm wearing a shirt that says "Every Jew Counts." Sometimes I wear a shirt that says "This is what a Zionist look like," or something else about Zionism. And walking around New York City, sometimes there's neighborhoods where I get shouts, people sneer at me. Some people, it's not nice. It's not fun. And my wife and I keep having these conversations. Should I keep wearing them? And should she keep wearing them? And should we encourage other people to wear them? Now, I don't want to wear them. I'd rather just wear my plain black t-shirt and not have anyone's attention, not draw anyone's attention. But the reason I keep wearing them so that 20 years from now or 30 years from now, when my son will be my age, he'll have the right to decide whether he wants to come out as a Zionist or not. If I don't make it, if I normalize shutting down Zionist voices, then when Zionists will want to speak up in the future, they might not be able to speak up because it will be too late. So the fear is real, but it shouldn't be our guiding principle.
Have there been moments that you genuinely felt afraid? And has the fight, this type of fight personally cost you?
Um, Genuinely afraid? Yeah. I tell this to everyone that when you speak up, when you stand up, first of all, you take on a responsibility. You're representing something bigger than yourself, so you have to be on your best behavior. Whenever I get more mad at seeing Jews or pro-Israeli allies screaming something negative online or cursing someone than I see someone cursing at us, because that really, it hurts our mission. But in order to, so I do find myself in these kind of like conflicting events. I always keep a distance. I tell people to keep a distance, physical distance. Make sure that you are not in any danger, but at the same time, don't crouch. Right? I would rather you walk 2 blocks away from wherever the anti-Israel protest is and hold your own protest, and so that people walking out of that protest will see you and please have that balancing act, rather than you getting in some confrontation and then never doing that again. So yeah, I have experienced some near physical confrontations, I would say, but I always remove myself. I always de-escalate. I always remind both myself and the other person, like, this is not how you solve conflicts. Not here and not in the Middle East, right? Like, if you really want to solve this, you gotta use your mouth, use your brain, not don't use your fists. Unless, of course, someone throws a punch first. Yeah.
What were your thoughts on the recent protests that were in New York outside the synagogue, and I guess they marched through the streets in a Jewish residential neighborhood in Brooklyn? Do you think they feel more empowered because of your mayor,
Yeah.
or what were your thoughts on that?
Well, I once heard someone say something that really affected me. They said, when we protest in our neighborhoods. When they protest in our neighborhoods. And that sends a very, very strong message, right? Because what do we do when we protest? For almost 2 years, we protested for the release of the hostages. Where did we do it? We did it where we felt comfortable in our neighborhoods to get our people to wake up, right? So why are they protesting in our neighborhoods? And there's no like obviously all the neighborhoods are mixed and diverse, but majority Jewish or substantially Jewish. Why do they do that? Or in Pico Robertson in LA, right? They do that because they're not trying to rile up to wake up their side to some truth because they are lying. What they're trying to do is send us into hiding. And of course, that's not new. When the KKK wanted to march their white supremacist anti-Semitic hatred, where did they go? They went to the most Jewish neighborhoods, in Skokie, Illinois, right? Now, they chose areas with high concentration of Nazi Holocaust survivors, right? Those that survived the Holocaust were targeted. Why? Because they wanted to send a message that we are against you. That's the same thing. These, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, and anti-American mobs, they're coming to Jewish neighborhoods to say we are against you. And of course, when you have a mayor or any leader, but in New York City, it's the mayor, who speaks out of two sides of their mouth, right? On one side says, oh, I love Jewish people. And the other side says, I have no problem with you targeting Jewish people, in so many words. His base gets the message. His base gets the message that, you know, if we're not encouraged to do this, at least we're not being told to stand back. So unfortunately, I feel like we're going to see a lot more of that before things get better.
Mhm. Do you think that these elite universities still care primarily about their students' education or about protecting their brand, the money coming in, their ideology? What do you think they really value more?
You know, pre October 7, I had my doubts. Post October 7, it's become very, very clear to me, at least the universities that I have been in, which is Cornell, Princeton, the New School in Columbia, and then others that I've been interacting with, that they only care about money. It's not that they don't care about the students, but they see the students as customers. And when you see the student as customer, you want to do a few things. One, bring as many customers in, no matter the level, no matter the ideology, and retain as many of the customers. No matter what they do while they're in your shop or here on campus, you don't want to kick them out because that's lost income. So what do you do when you care about money? Well, you care about the donors, which is alumni, you care about federal grants, and you care about PR because PR ends up translating into. What's missing from all of this is there's no caring about the one thing that academia is supposed to care about. And by the way, academia is not supposed to care about students. It's not supposed to care about professors. It's supposed to care about the truth. That's it. Academia is supposed to advance our research into the truth and advance our educating the transmission of the truth to for next generations. Both of those things are absent from most conversations in the broader sphere of what's wrong with academia, but also behind closed doors in faculty meetings. I've been in so many faculty meetings where we discussed the drop in student enrollment. I've been, I don't even remember if I've been in one in my 16 years in academia where the conversation was, are students learning? Are our students leaving here better educated than when we got them? Are we serving our students well? No one at Columbia, at least openly, is leading anything to discuss that. Personally, privately, maybe people care about that, but that's not a guiding star of Columbia. Are we getting more students, meaning more money in the door? That's what matters to Columbia. And of course, are we graduating them so that others can come in?
Mhm.
And I say this now, honestly, by the way, it might sound like I'm being, very calm about it. This was one of my most painful realizations because I did think that academia was at least one of the places that could save the world, save humanity, save society. Now I'm not so sure.
Yeah. As we know, a lot of the funding to these universities comes from Qatar, other countries, and they target the universities. But why do you think so many highly educated people are vulnerable to propaganda?
Well, look, we're all vulnerable to propaganda. We, in fact, when it's propaganda we agree on, we call it information or education. When we disagree, so we're all vulnerable to basic psychological processes, and that's what I spent when I was before all of this. I was a social psychologist studying judgment and decision making. How do people make up their mind? How do we persuade others? And the problem is not so much that the propaganda exists. We've had propaganda since we've had writing. The problem is that the propaganda is one outscaling human intelligence in terms of like the tools that are being used right now, video, images, social media, and all of that. And the other one is that it's not transparent where the information is coming from, right? So let's say I grew up in Israel, but for a couple of years I lived in post-communist Romania. So it was right after the Ceausescu fell and the Romanian government became democratic. But there was a deep distrust in the government. Why? Because people learned that the government sends you propaganda, and therefore whatever comes from the government you take with 5 grains of salt, and then you make up your own mind. Right? That's the problem with authoritarian regimes, that they end up losing the trust of the people. But what happens when the propaganda is seen as just regular information, where you open up your computer or your phone and you see a video and you don't know that that video was pushed at you because of money like Qatari, Russian, Chinese, Iranian money. You don't know whether the video is real or not, right? And then when you go to class and a teacher uses that video, maybe they don't even know, maybe they do know, and it just fits their ideological persuasions. Now, all of a sudden, you don't even know to treat it as propaganda. So it becomes this really problematic issue that, now if you go to on American campuses at Columbia University, again, we're focusing mostly on the humanities and the social sciences. Many undergrads will tell you that they trust Al Jazeera, Qatari owned news agency, who's been known to distort the truth on many different things, who's been known to platform bona fide terrorists, who's been known to platform the most anti-Semitic rhetoric. They would trust Al Jazeera more than they do a American news agency. And I'm intentionally leaving that blank. You want to put in Fox News, you want to put in MSNBC, whatever you want. They trust something coming from the outside more than something coming from the inside. And that is a problem. That's a huge problem.
Do you think that elite universities still value debate, or mainly it's ideological consensus? It's rare to see them bringing in both sides to have a discussion
Yeah.
nowadays.
So I think there's an important distinction here. Debate and discussion are two different things. The goal of debate is to win. It's not necessarily the truth. And universities love debates. They love debates because if if all you care about is who wins, not what the truth is, then you can set up the game so that you win, that your sides win. How do you do that? First of all, you have 90% of people on one side of the political aisle and 10% of people on the other side of the political aisle. Already it's a mismatch. Right? The other thing is you bring the most extremist cases from the other side, the looniest people from the other side, and the most articulate and rhetorically cohesive from your side. Right? You bring them on to a debate. You have it on a campus where also like the home audience is with one side, and then lo and behold, the debate happens, and the university's homogeneous ideology wins. I'm not interested in debates because the point is not debate. The point is discussion. The point is bringing people in together that disagree on some things, maybe agree on other things, having them discuss, hear each other, and leave. Maybe with the opinions unchanged, but with more information. That is something universities, at least from my point of view, don't really care about anymore. And again, people say, okay, so this guy is Jewish, he's Israeli, he's got an axe to grind. Of course, I will own up to that. But that's true of other stuff as well. If you want to have a debate about policies regarding abortion, policies regarding gun control, policies regarding immigration, policies regarding tariffs, whatever it is that are the top issues that Americans care about, you'll have debates that you know in advance who will win, what side will win, but you'll never have a discussion where people are just left to make up their own minds.
Yeah. Why do you think so many journalists, the media, instinctively frame Israel as the villain? Do you think that the media helped to create this moral confusion after October 7th?
Oh, yes, the media is a culprit in all of this, for sure. The media and the social media together have been the main culprits. And there's, and people have written dissertations and entire books about all of this. So I want to leave people with just one thing to think about. Where did the people writing in the newspapers, where are the people making the decisions in the newspapers, where are the people buying ads for the newspapers, where were they educated? They don't come out of nowhere. You look at the New York Times editorial board, most of them come from the top 20, maybe 30 universities in the United States, the same universities where we see these ideologies that are, again, anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli, and anti-American. So, of course, when they go and they get a job at the New York Times or at the Washington Post or MSNBC or wherever they get their job, they are going to use what they learned on campus. In fact, that is what they're supposed to do. No one's going to tell you, go spend 4 years learning something and then don't do that. Right. And then when the Pulitzer Prize, which is housed at Columbia University, acknowledges and rewards, for example, photographers that were part of the October 7 massacre, not reporting it, participating in it, and Pulitzer Prize rewards them as the journalists. Well, where is that coming from? Because the board of the Pulitzer Prize has been educated and steeped in the same ideology. So now you create this perfect ecosystem where you students for journalism learn something, then they go out into the world to basically implement what they learned, and then they come back to the campus to get rewarded for what they just did. So basically, it's a perfect storm, but it's an engineered storm. It's designed to be this way.
Mhm. Now we know that when Hamas did October 7th, they definitely had in mind what was going to happen. Do you think they understood the Western psychology, of how the West would react to the massacre, and how they're emotionally manipulating the narrative, that they predicted that this would be so effective? Like, is this something that you think that they planned from beforehand?
Well, this is where I would tell people like, stop listening to me. Don't, it doesn't matter what I think. What we should care about is the facts. The facts are that in 1993, Hamas senior leadership had a meeting in Philadelphia where it was wiretapped. That's why we know about the secret meeting, where they said explicitly that they are going to try and infiltrate three major institutions: the media, think tanks, and academia, universities. And that was 30 years before the October 7 massacre. 30 years later, who are the biggest champions of Hamas, or at least the biggest justifiers and legitimizers of Hamas? The media, think tanks, or NGOs, and all the other stuff that come with them, and academia. So they were planning for this. Did they know that this would be so successful, so big, so vehemently anti Semitic? I don't know. I assume many in Hamas leadership were actually surprised by how much support they received. And it is now these were facts, right? My personal opinion is that the war could have ended much faster. The hostages would have come home, more of them, and much earlier, and many, many thousands fewer Palestinian civilians killed, if not for the support Hamas got from the West. When you are a terrorist in a tunnel, making decisions of should we put up our hands and surrender, or should we keep fighting? And then you see 5,000 protesting in Boston, 10,000 protesting for you in New York City, 20,000 in London and LA and San Francisco and Austin and Chicago and Melbourne and Sydney. And you see this and you're like, well, all I have to do is just keep going and the West will carry me. Now, I'm not sure that every single protester in the West realizes what they did, that they actually gave oxygen to Hamas to keep fighting, and to Hezbollah and the Houthis, and now to the IRGC. But the effect of what they were doing was this. Yeah.
Hmm. Do you think that October 7th, fundamentally changed Jewish identity in America? Do you think that many assimilated Jews were shocked to discover how many of the people that accepted them before no longer do accept them?
I I think time will tell, but I think if there is a Jew out there who has not been changed by the October 7 massacre and the surge in anti-Semitism worldwide, I think they haven't been paying attention. Really. I don't see how you cannot be changed. Now, the change doesn't have to be the same way as my change. My change was to realize that, you know, anti Semitism is the one constant in our crazy history, and we need to keep fighting against that. And made me stronger, a stronger Jew, a more proud Jew, a more knowledgeable Jew. Other Jews, what they learned from this is I'm going to try to assimilate as quickly as possible, hoping that whatever comes next will come before my children or grandchildren, after my children or grandchildren get that stamp of approval, non-Jew certified, right? The non-Jew kosher. Um, Other people went to the opposite and say, you know what? We, as a Jew, now I'm going to fight against Israel because, and they come up with some crazy solutions and reasons for themselves. But if you have not changed, then I don't understand the mentality. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, you said that Jews are often the test case for wider societal collapse. What did you mean by that?
So if you look at history, if you look at any big wave of anti-Semitism, while it targets the Jews, it targets the Jews for being different, right? Religiously different, ethnically different, ethnostates different, whatever it is. But then once they are done or not satisfied with just going after the Jews, it starts targeting every person who is deemed as different or as incongruent with whatever society desires at that moment, right? So famously, the Nazis, while they focused on Jews, they went after Black people, Jehovah Witnesses, LGBTQ, physical and mental disabilities, etc. You see this in really like when Crusaders massacred the Jews en masse in the 12th century, they were doing it on their way to massacre Muslims in Jerusalem, right? So it's never just about the Jews. And you especially see it nowadays because when, like, I can just imagine a non-Jewish person going and seeing a protest, and we don't even tell them what that protest is, but we tell them, look for an American flag. And they come and tell me, we saw an American flag. It was very hard to find. It was just one and it was being trampled on. We saw one and it was being burnt on. Okay. Now look at what, is anyone saying anything about the US? Is anyone singing the national anthem? No, we never heard that. Okay. Was anyone saying anything? It's like, well, they were saying the NYPD is like the KKK. This is not about Israel, right? NYPD is a white supremacist. Okay, that's interesting. What else did they say? Oh, they said that the United States is a genocidal, imperialist, colonialist country. It's like, okay, interesting. So we're not even talking about Jews here. Now, then I asked them, just out of curiosity, what was this protest? I said, oh, nominally it was a Free Palestine protest. It's like, okay, you see what's happening here? So nominally, it was a protest against Israel, against the Jewish state, but you just mentioned 3, 4, 5 different things that have nothing to do with Jews, have nothing to do with Israel, and have everything to do with the United States of America. And that, to me, is the perfect embodiment of going after the Jews is only the symbol of what's going to come next. And what's going to come next is, you know, yes, we've decolonized Israel. Let's keep going. Let's get Australia. Let's get the UK. Let's get the United States. Let's get Canada. Let's get Mexico, right? Mexicans are just, they're not Native Americans. Some of them are, but the Aztecs and the Mayas, but some of them came from Hispaniola, right? So it doesn't end with the Jews. It never, never does.
Do you think that anti-Zionism is just an excuse for anti-Semitism? Can there be people that are just against the state of Israel but not anti-Semitic? And why does it seem like people lose moral clarity the moment Jews are involved? You don't see other races or religions being treated the same way.
I want to be very, very clear, and I'll then explain why. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, period. No ifs, no buts, no, okay, maybe there's a caveat. No, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Now, if we take that and then we say, okay, so how do I explain is my friend who hates the Israeli government, are they anti-Zionist, which means they're anti-Semitic? And I say, well, do they believe the Jewish people have a right to self-determination? That's it. Do they believe the Jewish people are just like any other people and they have a right for a state of their own? If your friend says, no, they don't, then the next question is, do they believe that Muslim states have a right to exist or Christian states have a right to exist? Now, if they say, no, they don't, they say, okay, your friend is an anarchist. We're not an anti-Semite. We're just an anarchist. And okay. But if they start telling me they only believe the Jewish state has no right to exist, but every other Christian states, Muslim states, Hindu states, Bhutanese states, like they all have a right to exist. And you're only focusing on the Jews, you're singling them out. And that is anti-Semitism, right? So now we can also go historically and talk about anti-Zionism in the Soviet Union, which was basically just targeting Jews in every other name. We can talk about statistics, about the fact that 95% of world Jewry is Zionist. So by all means, when you attack Zionists, you attack Jews. We can talk about all those things, but logically, if you oppose the Jewish people's right to self-determination, then you oppose Jews. So you are an anti-Semite.
Yeah. Have you had, many of your Jewish students confide with you and speak to you about what they're going through on campus, and what kind of advice did you give them?
Man, that's the hardest one. So I'm no longer at Columbia. I left when it became unbearable. And I mostly just miss being there with the students, teaching, discussing. A lot of students would tell me, the two main things that they would tell me is social relationships. Just the fact that other students all of a sudden stopped being their friends, roommates stopped, moved out or asked them to move out. Why? Because they are Jews who believe in the Jewish people's right to self-determination. That's it. The other type that I would get is students asking me, what do I do about this professor? What do I do about that professor? This professor is in my class and they're telling me, you know, they're saying this and that. Do I confront them? Do I not confront them? And there's a little bit more of like, advise me on how to fight a machine when I'm the weak one in the machine. And there I always told them, always start with curiosity, always assume the best intentions in the other side, but never let them off the hook, right? If they say, oh, I was mistaken, I didn't mean to say this, I didn't realize it, perfect. How are you going to change? How are you going to make sure that you don't do this again, that you don't make this mistake again? Basically, I told my students, whatever we all did in academia in 2020 after George Floyd's murder, and whatever we did in academia in 2021 with the wave of anti-Asian hate, that's what you need to do in 2026 when it comes to anti-Jewish hate. That's it. The playbook is already there. The blueprint is there. We just need to apply it to our current situation.
Mhm. What do you say to students who just want to keep their heads down and survive and not have to, uh, face this? They kind of want to go into hiding or whatever.
I tell them I get it. I tell them that I really, really get it. I don't blame them. First of all, I tell them, and I tell when I speak with high school and college students, I tell them, look, my generation failed you. You were supposed to be the generation that just goes and enjoys it. We were asleep at the wheel, and now you have to deal with the consequences. Now, given that you have to deal with the consequences, how are you going to deal with them? And I present them the tragedy of the commons. It's a very famous game theoretical theory idea, which is what is good for the individual might not be good for the collective, and what's good for the collective might not be good for the individual. So, yes, every single one of you can just keep your head down and study. But if you all do and no one fights, then this becomes a space where none of you can thrive in or even be in. And I give him the example of the same what happens in Israel, right? Do you think there's a mom or dad that in their right minds are happy about the fact that their kids go and fight in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Lebanon or in Iran? Or of course not. Everyone from the individual perspective, the most natural thing is to keep your head down and just live your life. But if we all do that, then our haters, our deflectors, will gain what they want. So I tell students, you need to find no, not everyone needs to be like me. Not everyone needs to be screaming and shouting and posting and doing all that stuff. You need to find your way of fighting back. If you're quick with a pen, join the student newspaper and make sure that we have a Zionist voice in the Jewish newspaper. If you're a good organizer, organize rallies and protests. If you are someone who doesn't like the conflict and but wants to help, support Jewish life, right? Create Jewish culinary, a cooking group or a dance group or a movie group that's open to everyone, allies included. But again, strengthen Jewish life because at the end of the day, it's about Jews. So if you strengthen Jewish Zionist existence on campus, you've done your part. But I tell them, whatever you do, it's good. The only thing that you shouldn't do is nothing.
Now we're seeing physical attacks on Jews in Europe, the UK, Canada. Do you fear that is going to trickle down to America? Do people say that America's, a few years behind?
Well, we've seen it already in America. We've seen a murder in DC. We've seen the attack in Boulder, Colorado. We have seen it obviously from the far left. We've seen it from the far right in Chabad, in Poway. We've seen it in Tree of House Synagogue, like Tree of Life Synagogue. We've seen it in so many places. Um, it seems like Americans are waiting for something big. They're waiting for an attack that I hope never comes in order to wake up. But I worry that that attack will come and that waking up is not going to help the people that will be the victims of that next attack. So the best thing that I can tell people is you don't want to turn into Europe. Europe was the US 20 years ago. So don't do what Europe did for 20 years. Do something else.
Mhm. What happens to a civilization when it can no longer distinguish between, terrorists and democracies? The line gets blurred of people, protesting in support of terrorists. Um, you know, is there anything that can be done? Is that, in the UK, I mean, in Europe, people in the governments are afraid to speak up. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, smarter people than me have said this.
Oh,
When truth no longer matters, society either goes towards totalitarianism or anarchy, right? Because what happens when truth no longer matters? Either the strongest, the richest, the most powerful, whoever takes control of the narrative, takes control of the truth. Hitler and fascism, Mussolini, Benito Mussolini. You got the Soviet Russia. You got Fidel Castro. You got North Korea. You got the IRGC. Basically saying this is the truth. We control the truth. Everyone has to align. Or alternatively, is that no one can agree on the same truth. No one can agree even on what is reality. And then you just get anarchy and people keep fighting each other, which typically is then resolved through totalitarianism. I am very worried about this. And this again goes back to the point of this isn't just about Jews in Israel. When we live in a world where a respected Pulitzer Prize winning journalist can write an op ed based on shoddy anonymous sources that targets a minority, and it doesn't matter if it is targeting Israelis and Jews now, but targets a minority. And instead of the newspaper, New York Times in this case, but it can be any other newspaper, instead of the newspaper saying, no, our first allegiance is to the truth and to facts and to the process, saying, you know, he's allowed to say what he wants, that's his opinion, that is a dangerous tool. It's a dangerous weapon. Now it's being targeted at Israel and the Jews. Tomorrow it will be targeted whoever disagrees with what that distinguished Pulitzer Prize winner wants to attack. Same thing when Time magazine, I think it was Time magazine, maybe it was The Economist, was creating images of starving children in Gaza. Now, some children were starving in Gaza. I'm not saying that they weren't. Was there starvation in Gaza? Unintentional? Believe that there was. But when you direct a picture, you tell the kids, stand this way, hold this spot, your readers are losing trust in you. And now, when you want to show me a real picture of a real issue that's happening in the United States about, again, immigration, taxes, whatever it is, I'm not going to believe you because now you've completely ruined the trust that exists there. That, in the end, will be the crumbling of society. Not because of Jews, not because of Israelis, not because of hate, but because we have this huge weapon of truth distortion that's being used at groups and individuals and ideas without any watchdogs.
what gives you hope right now for the Jewish people, for the state of Israel? Is there anything, after October 7th that kind of was a silver lining for you? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've had many. First of all, interactions like this. You said you started in earnest after October 7. I completely pivoted. Seeing younger Americans, Jewish Americans, like rising up and being proud of their Jewishness, being critical of some stuff, but also very proud and wanting to, participate in Jewish life and in fighting against hatred. That gives me hope. Another thing that gives me hope in the United States is the fact that no mayor, no governor, no president is forever. The Jewish people predate every, every current democracy, and we we will be here. So it gives me hope. Like even as we fight people like Mamdani and make sure that he can't do all the damage that he wants to do and expressed, I also know that he's not going to be the mayor forever, but Jews will be here and we will be sitting on Shabbat, and Seders and Sukkah and everything long after his name and my name will be erased from history. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Wow.
Every Jew counts.
Yeah, for sure. I want to definitely thank you for your time, for your bravery, for standing up when so many choose to remain silent. Where can people find you? Listen to your amazing podcast, by the way. And if you want to leave us with a final
Yeah.
message, the floor is
So
yours.
I would say, so you can find me on social media, on Instagram and on Twitter. I'm at Shai Davidai, ShaiDavidai. I also have a podcast where I shut up and amplify other people's voices. It's called Here I Am with Shai Davidai. It's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever, where you can see many Jews and allies who are fighting against this craziness. And I recently debuted a new podcast called Pragmatic Judaism, which is about Jewish life, not fighting the hate. Because remember, at the end of the day, my goal is not to fight the hate, but to preserve and flourish as Jewish people. So, Pragmatic Judaism is my attempt to do that. It's a short 7-minute podcast once a week against Spotify, Apple, Instagram. Yeah.
Amazing. Wishing you the best of luck in the future. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you, and keep standing tall.
Thank you. If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real, it is stored safely, it is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.